Yes.
So, welcome everyone. I shall immediately introduce our guest today, Giovanni Maddalena. Giovanni Maddalena is Associate Professor of History of Philosophy and Philosophy of Political Communication at the University of Molise. His academic work focuses on American philosophy, especially on Charles Peirce and classical pragmatism. He is Senior Fellow of the Institute of American Thought and member of the Scientific Board of the Philosophy Department at École Normale Supérieure. He is founder and executive editor of the journal European Journal of Pragmatism and American Philosophy. He is also the author of the Philosophy of Gesture, Montreal McGee Queen University Press in 2015. And in the book that we introduced today, The History and Theory of Post-Truth Communication, released by Palgrave in 2020, in April, and that is co-written with Guido Gili, Maddalena explores the notion of post-truth, its history and meaning for human beings. Chosen by the Oxford English Dictionary as Word of the Year in 2016, post-truth has entered both journalistic and common languages. There is, however, much confusion and a suffocating rhetoric about what it is and how it became such a powerful concept, and its positive or perverse effects. Philosophy, as it is understood and practiced in the West, is and has been generally considered to be the search for truth. Nevertheless, in the history of a philosophy conceived as the historical attempt to reverse the official philosophy, from Nietzsche's idea of truth as a mobile army of metaphors to Foucault's investigations of the nexus of truth, subjectivity, and discourse, many philosophers have attempted to deconstruct Western claims to objective and universal truth. If these are the roots of post-truth, what is behind the current rise in interest and alarm about the concept? While the success of the expressions post-truth and fake news, conceived as the principal manifestation of the post-truth phenomenon, the concepts they embody are far from new. As Bateson noted, if animals communicate with simplicity and innocence, man's behavior is corrupted by deceit, even self-deceit, by purpose, and by self-consciousness. And also Derrida, in The Animal That Therefore I Am, when he talks about Lacan's analysis of animality, stresses the idea of an animal as characterized by an incapacity to pretend, or to erase its traces, an incapacity that makes it unable to be a subject, that is to say, a subject of the signifier. Since the beginning of the human history, men have dealt with lie, illusion, deceit, and therefore every epoch has been rife with fake news. An example is the donation of Constantine, an apocryphal medieval text used to legitimize the temporal power of the church that was exposed as a fake only many centuries later by the humanist Lorenzo Valla. So the question is, why the paradoxical success of these new expressions, post-truth and fake news, if they aren't so new? According to Maddalena and Gili, the acceleration in the 20th century of the use of deception and manipulation, also for political and commercial purposes, is the outcome of three related processes. The first one is the refinement and increased diffusion of mass media. The second one is the spread of psychosociology as the study of collective and social phenomena. And the third one is a cultural process that led to a transformation of the concept of truth and reality, of course, especially in the fields of philosophy, media studies, and human sciences. Luhmann said, Whatever we know about our society, we know through the mass media. And it's like an obstacle course through communication strategies, social vote, deep fake, framing, the bragging news philosophy, and the constant overlap between opinion and information, which recalls the ancient opposition between doxa and episteme. And the ideal of internet as the new agora, a digital public square, has to deal with its own contradiction. The fact that communities on the web and social media, while theoretically open and inclusive, are actually often constituted according to self-selective principles and homophily. Is what some researchers call the echo chambers and filter bubble, something invisible and apparently non-existent to those living inside of it. In simple words, the more a user is active online, the more his or her opinions and orientations become evident, and the greater possibility that he or she will become surrounded by similar content. So the question is, who is the most vulnerable to the assaults of fake news and post-truth culture? The right answer is everyone. There's no real immunity, only some tricks, some strategies to defend ourselves from manipulation and to engage toward a rich relational realism. I give the floor to Giovanni Maddalena. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Alessandro. This is perfect. It's much more than it's already almost everything I could say, but it's fine. I will say something, and then we'll. I guess we can discuss afterwards. We can have a dialogue about these ideas. But before starting, thank you for the invitation. This is a very interesting and lively community. I'm only sad that this is unfortunately a digital encounter, but I hope we have the chance in better times to come closer in presence, as we say in Italy. And so I hope there will be the chance to do that. But so Alessandra told me, well, I will talk 40 minutes, 45. If it is too much, you can say that. You can say, okay, stop it. And otherwise, and then we'll have a discussion. Is that right? This is the policy. Okay. I prefer to stand, if you don't mind. I hope it works. Yes, it works. You can still see me. Yeah, I cannot stay and seated while I'm explaining things. So this is also what I do with my students. But if you cannot hear me well, just tell me. Okay. Let's talk about the problem of fake news. Alessandro already said that there is something a little odd about the fact that this notion has become so popular in the last times, in the last 4 years actually, and of course there is a political reason for that, and the reason is that the alarm went off when two political events happened. That is Brexit and the election of President Trump. Those were two events that started some reflection about the notion of fake news, a little deeper than we we did before that, before those events. But the problem has not started with Mr. Trump or with Brexit, because the problem, I think, is a very natural, if you want, a very natural problem of our society, of the different epochs of our communication, as Alessandra already introduced, and also about the spin that our culture took after the Second World War. And this is a sort of intertwined issue that we tried to disentangle in our book. I don't know if we succeeded, but in any case, this was at least an attempt to do that. Also, but let's start from the usual confusion that we have about the notion of fake news, because when we say fake news, we say different things, and of course this is not this is already not easy to understand, and I think this adds confusion to confusion. So in this 40 minutes and 35 now, I will say I will try to clarify, as we did in the book, a little bit about the notion of fake news, what we mean with that expression, the different areas, the semantic areas that we cover with this phrase, and second, we'll have I will try to focus on the cultural issue that I hinted before, and finally I will try to propose some sort of solution. So first of all, what do we mean when we say fake news? We mean different things. We tried with my colleague Guido Gili, we tried to clarify, to categorize those fake news, at least as they appear in communication, with three concentric rings. Let's say there is an innermost circle or an innermost area of fake news that is those are the easiest one to detect, and we have different names for that. We have different phenomena in communication related to that area. For example, what we call deep fakes, that is the possibility to use an electronic version of a person and to make him or her speak as we want, and or to act as we want. There is a long issue related to deep fakes and pornography. So celebs used for that kind, with that kind of manipulation of electronic images. And we have also all those the memes, that is small videos, small or pictures with captions difficult, which says something which is simply not happened. Those are, sociologically speaking, this is the area of factoids. That is something that didn't happen, and those are according, let's say, those are the funniest ones, and also I'm a little surprised, but we can discuss about that, that sometimes we think that really US elections or Italian elections or international politics can be changed by this kind of manipulation. I'm not sure about that. I didn't see the statistics about that, but usually also with the work that manipulation agencies do is to focus on people who are already convinced of something for this kind of device. So I don't think this is really the most dangerous thing, and not even the most effective. Surely it is it is something that gives to the creator of these factoids a lot of money, or it can be used on a large scale for clickbaiting or something like that. But to change history with that, I mean, there is something good to say about our electronic world. That is that those are easily debunked. So it's this is the kind of false news or false notions which Alessandra was referring to before. That is like the Constantine donation or N's telegram, something that changed history with one single fake news. I don't think at this moment is that easy to do something like that. But this is the innermost area, which is the easiest one to debunk. It is the strongest one. Maybe it is also the strongest one in order to reinforce the conviction that can be true. There is a second area which to me is much more dangerous, and we are all actors of this area, which is the area which covers a lot of phenomena, from nicknaming to the picture. I mean, the cutting the picture. For example, now I have the image that takes a wonderful library, but there is no. There is also the bed on the other side, and is this a fake news somehow? I mean, there are tools that we can use, and of course there is a huge big area which is the pseudo event area, which is the one who everybody learned to use. That is to create. Let's create an event to say something, but there is no event. Indeed, this is something that was created by Ronald Reagan back in the 80s, and afterward was kept in the White House by everyone, either Democrat or Republican. That is the idea that, okay, the president is kicking the first ball of the championship for the soccer team, such and such. Why? So there is no event, but the event is that the press room is creating the event. And Ronald Reagan's sentence was, keep me on the first page any day. And this was something that we learned. In Italy, we had the very famous and very good at that politician and Silvio Berlusconi. He was, since he had to deal with media all the time, and he created also several media, and he had, of course, the capacity to do that. He imported to Italy this kind of pseudo-event communication, which everybody is using. Sometimes I'm in charge, for example, of the communication of my university. we do the same. So the director is announcing the new school of something. Okay, this is the news, but the event is okay. Let's create an event. It is a pseudo event. It's not something that happens. I mean, what happens is that just that people are talking, but there is, so the announcing strategy, it's always a pseudo event. The first pseudo event, this is also in, sorry, I'm keeping just track of the time. In the very first pseudo event, you can find it in the book because it's funny. It's famous by Bernays because he was the first one to organize a manifestation which was supposedly was for emancipation of women. It was back in 1928, but and so you organized this parade of women smoking in the 5th Street in New York on Sunday before St. Patrick Cathedral. So it seemed something very progressive and also like trying to say to have a political meaning. But in fact, Bernays was paid by the tobacco's manufacturers. And the women who were parading were models he had casted before, and the main actor of this was his secretary. So, and he already prepared the pictures for the newspapers. So this is a kind of hiding, of course. This is more than a pseudo event. He hided the utterer, of course, but and he didn't apologize for that. He really thought that that was the real practice of communication and advertising. So this is a very wide area, I think. And I think everybody of us, for example, that chose this morning the angle of the camera is doing something like that. Of course, there is a sort of hiding something, yeah. And we learned, everybody learned exactly this kind of strategy that 100 years ago was just for some big gun of advertising. So Bernays was a theoretical thinker and was also the boss of a big agency. Now, every one of us knows how to do that. Every high school, well, not even high school, every 10 years old guy knows how to do that. And it is very important to remember that, to understand what the problem of fake news. And third, of course, that there is even let's say, a lighter area, a lighter and external ring of this classification of fake news, because of course there are jokes, there are ironies, white lies, so lies I say for good sake, but of course also sometimes also this area is not that easy to say it is okay or it is not dangerous. If you think about Charlie Hebdo, for example, is that satire that we can accept or not? Hard to tell. And so just to say that that there are different areas that we cover with these names. I think sometimes a little clarification would help also in public discussion, because it depends. So, for example, Mr. Trump is always saying this is fake news, and people who are against him are always saying fake news. But usually, both of them refer to the second area. So it's not that, which is an area which is difficult to detect and to say you are really guilty of lying. Are you lying? Well, are we lying when we decide the angle of the camera? Or are we interpreting reality? Difficult. Okay, so this is the clarification of the problem. I don't know if it is a clarification, at least it is a classification. Maybe it's more confusing than before, but you'll tell me later on. This is the first part. For the second part, I would like to understand why we are so in trouble when we say, is this a lie? Or is this allowed? For example, is it allowed to make fun of a religious guy? Or is it allowed to choose the angle of the camera? Is it a lie or it isn't? Why we are in trouble? Because we have, let's say, half century of discussion about it. And this half century, to make a long story short, for the sake of time, of course, the general idea of postmodernism, of constructivism, of a different form of, let's say, weakening of the concept of reality and truth, which are the twin terms which usually, traditionally served to disentangle our problem. So is that a lie? It was clear in, or at least a little more clear at the beginning of the 20th century, possibly even more so at the beginning of the 19th century. It's not that clear now, but the general idea of all these movements of thought is that those terms, reality and truth, were too heavy, and they, at the end, they shoved us into something that we didn't like very much, which was the experience of the Second World War, and even more, the experience of two totalitarianism, one from the left and the other one from the right, as idea in many places, not just two of them, but dozens of them. And all of them were always proposed and held on the basis that there is something which is the truth, and you can stick to it. You have to stick to it, and if you don't, you are outcasted, and actually you are outcast and you are killed. You are the enemy of the people. You are you really are at risk. So there was let's say a good reason, or at least a justifiable reason for which we casted some doubt on those terms, on the term truth and its strong relationship to the term reality. I think that was pretty much the story of what happened in those different fields. There was a battle for liberation, but the battle for liberation was understood as a distancing from a conception of reality which was too strict, and which didn't allow for the power, the freedom of interpretation, of reinventing ourselves. Of course, as you all know, probably there was in France, above all, a huge Nietzsche renaissance back in the 60s. And but also in Italy, let's say that the idea of taking hermeneutics to the extreme and to what we call the post-modernism, that is to the idea that we have to put into doubt not only those terms, not only certainties about not only the old metaphysics, but also the our trust in reason and in its capacity to discover something about the world. That was the idea of postmodernism, criticizing modernity. That is the absolute trust in reason, in human reason, because I think because the human reason brought to those extremes. I think we can talk about that later on. In our reading, this is I think the original thing of the book. At the end, what we say is that this is an ancient debate about realism and nominalism, but we have to understand the idea of nominalism and the idea of realism also in a different way, which I learned from Charles Sanders Peirce, the founder of pragmatism, which is the idea that nominalism is to conceive reality as absolutely severed from our knowledge. That is, there is always a gulf between which cannot we cannot bridge between knowledge and reality. And according to this idea, for example, it is a little odd also among philosophers, because according to this idea, Plato, for example, is a nominalist, or Russell, and while Hegel is a realist. So it's it's a little bit different from the usual classification, but it is a good idea to say, okay, all those people who tried to free ourselves from reality reinstaured this kind of gap, that is reality. We don't know if there is reality like a reference, or because there is this gap which we cannot bridge. It is, for example, Umberto Eco first version, because he changed his mind later on, but first version of Umberto Eco is pretty much a good summary of all this. So this is what culturally I think it happened, and I think this is this last difference is a little bit the originality of the book. That is the original reading of the history in different fields, in order to unite all those different fields like philosophy, sociology, communication studies, journalism studies, which are all different per se, but there is a similar trend in all these fields. Finally, last 10 minutes, 13 minutes, if I'm right, is to say, okay, so what are the way out from this solution? Because first of all, do we need a way out from this solution, from this situation? Let's say this is what I was saying at the beginning. Let's say that everybody in the scholarly world started to think that we need a solution after 2016 elections in both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. But certainly what we understood is that I think it was also before that. I think it's the start, in philosophy at least, a very strong realist movement back in 2001 after the Twin Towers attack. Because, of course, the idea that every interpretation is okay, that anything goes, that was the expression, which sometimes was even, I mean, this is a caricature, of course, of many thinkers, but it was the pop version of all of them, which is, okay, any interpretation is just as good as any other one. After, with the turn of the century, I think that this radical hermeneutic position came to a crisis. And I saw, since I'm old, I saw that philosophy swinged toward a more realist approach. But of course, and so I think that the idea of going back to reality was there before 2016. But certainly, 2016 was a crucial political, historical watershed. Now, if we need a way out, because I think it is legitimate to say, no, it is like that, we want that. Yeah, which is, for example, the position from a guy from England whose name is Fuller. I met him in a conference about fake news. He's arguing that this is simply postmodernism, and it's fair, as good as it gets. Let's say that let's go on and let's see what happens. No. There is no point to go back to any kind of realism, accepting all consequences of that, of course. So let's imagine a way out. I will list the main the main proposals which are on the table at this moment, and of course the first one is. Let's go back to hard reality. That is almost to something like we call in the book the 2.0 positivism. Let's return to communication and communication of news, which is of course the main topic. Let's return to it in the hardest possible way, which is to give data severed from comments, as facts separated from comments, as the good old school said. There was the 2017 advertising campaign of the New York Times was "The truth is hard." I don't like it very much. The truth is hard sounds like I can smash it on you. But the truth is hard. But also in the COVID, in the COVID months, 3 months ago, CNN published, you can find it, a video campaign which was Facts Comfort. Facts help you. Facts saves us. I don't know, something like that. And there were different verbs like that, but the subject was always fact, and the verbs were always positive, very positive. So let's return to facts. But it's hard to do that after all this story, because you cannot share the outcomes of postmodernism. For example, I don't share them, but I cannot deny many of the inputs, I think, that postmodern authors gave to the comprehension of reality. And above all in communication, because they understood very much. Let's think about McLuhan, for example. The medium is the message. This is, it cannot be an ideology, but if you have a Twitter, for example, or Facebook, if you have both of them, for example, you know you communicate in different ways and you are thinking in different ways. So it's hard to return to a sort of positivism, because I think we are losing too much. And the second solution, which is often proposed, is I had a debate with the director of the Polytechnic of Milan about that, because he put courses of critical thinking in every single program, which is good. I'm glad, because there are chairs for philosophers and it's fine, open positions for everybody, which is fine. But critical thinking, if you think about that, many times one of for example, some of the big supporters of some fake news are those who believe conspiracy theories. And usually they start from critical thinking. Of course, there is always something weird than in the using of this critical thinking, but the general idea is I'm not a fool. I'm not going to believe that. I'm not going to believe anything that comes from the news, anything that comes from the mainstream. I'm not going to believe to anything, okay, because I want to be critical, and I cannot trust. Okay, this is not always this philosopher I studied so much that's why I'm quoting him this way like a friend. But so Charles Sanders Peirce, he said, well, there is a difference between real doubt and paper doubt. The real doubt is the scientific doubt, that is that I have a firm arrays of beliefs, and then there is something that happens which crushes my previous beliefs because it is a surprising phenomenon, and their research starts. Is also what Wittgenstein was saying in Uncertainty. You cannot start from doubt. This is something that only the Cartesian mind can say, but the Cartesian mind defends a sort of paper doubt that is usually the conspiracy theory doubt. That is, you never know. Maybe it's not that way. Okay. And have you checked everything, which is impossible. And if you work with journalists, for example, you know it is impossible for reasons, for time reasons. There is no time to verify that way every news. And there is only one newspaper in the world, which is the New York Times, which has a correspondence in every place of the world, and they don't publish they don't publish but what the correspondent has seen, or at least he or she was in the place. So it is simply impossible. The idea of critical thinking applied to it's very good only theoretically, or for the sake of open positions at the Polytechnic of Milan. If you want for philosophers, it's very good. So our solution, the solution we worked with my colleague Guido Gili, has two sides. Let's say one is the philosophical side, which is a return to realism, but using, talking about Charles Sanders Peirce, a very sophisticated form of realism, which is a realism that includes possibilities, actualities, necessities, and a realism that unites in a very strong way theory and practice. And let's say it is a metaphysical realism, but you can also call it, if you are scared by the word metaphysics, you can call it relational realism. This is that our relations are part of reality, and also so you have to take a broad picture of what we are referring to, and somehow this is a sort of realism, but we can dialogue about that later on, is can save good part of what postmodernism has said. That is a radical hermeneutics has said. So also interpretation is part of reality. It's only that you cannot have any interpretation, but interpretation is like the outcome of a process of science and of relations. Science are relations of reality. So interpretations are developments of reality. And in this way, you can have, you can save the sophistication of 60 years of studies without going to the idea of anything goes. This is from the philosophical side, even if this is the cartoon version. But for the sake of time, I have to explain it this way, but we can talk about that later. And there is also the political side of that. And I think this version, because if we think to our experience, I think that the real critique, that we allowed other people to perform on us is really in circles where there is a sort of bound. So we are together, we are linked by a relation in which we know that we esteem each other, and we know each other, we esteem each other, and we can take critiques from other people because they are our relationships already. I mean, and usually this is a social theory, of course, of intermediate institutions. Of course, families of any kind, groups, parties, and any kind of community that allows critiques. Of course, sometimes communities are very closed and they don't allow critiques as well. But as far as I know, this is the only possible solution that came up as a little step toward a more human approach to a return to realism and to a real debunking of fake news. This is only to say, if you look, for example, at the committees that were put on by different actors of this story. For example, Facebook tried after 2016 to flag the news, the fake news. In the 2018 elections, they put on a war room for debunking fake news. European Union has created a committee of wise people to debunk fake news. In Italy, we had now the COVID fake news committee, but the only thing since it arrived to the Telegram into the Telegram channel of the ministry, the only fake news I have seen they debunked is that you have to drink a lot of wine in order to fight COVID. Okay. I don't know how many people took that seriously. If you want to drink wine, you can do that. But of course, I don't think anyone took seriously the idea that that was a good medical care of COVID. Only to say, so the idea of intermediate institutions or community is the idea that I think is a little closer to a real critique than the theoretical one, which are very pompous when you announce them in pseudo events, but that eventually came up at least until now in big failures. Thank you. I think my time is over.
Thank you, Giovanni. It was so I have a lot of questions. If I can start, of course, I really appreciate your book, your study, and especially the last chapter, because it was hard to see that really we are exposed to this kind of manipulation of reality, or not even a manipulation, but this uncertainty and all kinds of cognitive bias that you write, that you explain, like the desire to believe what we believe already, and or the third person effect, or what you call the peripheral roles. It's like something that I found related to what Bergson said, that there is no consciousness without a certain attention à la vie. But since the reality is too complex and even is too big, is too ephemeral for our cognitive capacities, abilities, we are in a certain way forced to imagine it through a simpler model, using some fictions, some reductions to grasp reality. This is the first point of discussion that I wanted to underline. And
yes, how can we do it? May I respond to any questions?
Like you want. If I don't know if anybody has other questions, we can.
No, I think it's better if I keep the answer short, but I'll try to. But yes, Alessandro, this is interesting because of course there is some sort of let's say necessity, or we have to admit that somehow it is unavoidable, this kind of reduction. The point is when reduction is too much. And I think the reduction is too much when we the point totally, and the reality backlashes, let's say, and in a strong way. And so I think at that point we have to admit that our ideological reduction is somehow wrong. And one of the points, for example, to me, for example, that was my experience. I was in the US in 2016, and to me it was very clear that the battle between Trump and Hillary Clinton was very close. And I even written on a national newspaper, Trump is going to win. And he won. And I think when let's say in Italy, the 99% of my friends were absolutely convinced that he was completely crazy, and he would never had the chance to win anything like that, and he was there just by a crazy hazard of the history. Well, then I think you have something to say. When something goes wrong that way, and it's so big, you have to reformulate your communication. You didn't get a very important part of reality. And with Brexit was about the same. I didn't know exactly the situation with Brexit because I'm not at the same. I don't have the same acquaintance with the British world. But so I think it is unavoidable to be ideological. We all are. And I think it is a positive thing to admit that, just not to say, okay, you are ideological. I'm not. I'm only saying the truth about the reality. No, okay, we all are. Somehow, in big, we have big and small ideologies, but we all are into ideologies, and I agree with that. But I think that exactly like we are doing this moment, and there are small communities of people who can criticize each other, accepting the critique, and then helping one another to at least to avoid the worst ideology, please, like the worst ones. So this is my guess, if I got your point. But this is yeah. So because we are all falling into those sociological, psychological tricks that are ideological. This is something that I learned very much from Wassily Grossman. If you have not read him, read him. He's wonderful, a novelist from Russia, a very interesting figure. The main novel is Life and Fate. Fate in destiny, not fate, because Italians have a little small problems of pronunciation with that word. Okay.
Thank you. There's anybody has a question? You can also write, yeah, Francesca, please. Francesca is our fellow at CAS. Please.
Yeah, thank you very much for this fascinating presentation. While I was listening, another word came up to my mind, and it's the word propaganda. which it seems to me that it has a different semantic connotation, because especially it is very grounded in the 20th century and especially in the Cold War. Of course, propaganda can draw on real facts, but it can also draw on manipulation, being it fake news or a selective approach to knowledge or facts. And at first sight, I would say that propaganda conveys an idea of a top-down approach, like something spread on purpose by a political power. And especially socialist countries appropriated this word, and they even used it in for bodies explicitly in charge of propaganda or cultural activities, policies. But this term, of course, can also be applied to policies enacted in the Western Bloc during the Cold War. While on the other hand, it seems to me that fake news are often understood as a bottom-up phenomenon. Like anyone can share fake news, but not everyone is regarded as able to share propaganda. But we all know that fake news can serve as a tool for example, orchestrated campaigns or political aims, or they can be used in an organized way to support a cause or to damage a cause. So I'm wondering whether these two concepts, propaganda and fake news, can be put into relation with each other. If you can elaborate a little bit on that.
Yes, thank you very much. This is a very important question. Of course, let's say propaganda is, as you said, is usually understood as a top-down phenomenon and usually related to explicitly ideological institutions or states or situations. The problem is that, and it's true that fake news are understood as a bottom-up phenomenon. I think we did not elaborate in the book about that, but this is very interesting. What I think is that what happened with the new internet, let's say with from 2007 on, that is from the social networks on, the 2.0 internet, is that those concepts mixed it up, and this is one of the reasons for which the fake news phenomenon is not has something new in comparison to big lies of history from Constantine donation or Helm's telegram, because I think that this distinction is not working anymore, because you can create a bottom-up propaganda, and you can have a top-down fake news, and this is what happened, because there is the possibility to transform, let's say, what was the usual ability of mass media, and so it was used by the Soviet Union state or by the big company in the West. Now it's possible for everybody to create, not really for everybody, but let's say there is the possibility to create a propaganda bottom up. In Italy, we have, for example, well, there are political movements who created strong propaganda about single topics like, for example, anti-vax, or we had in Italy we had the example of the 5-star movement, very well organized in a bottom-up way with a very strong propaganda with against the enemy, with all the, let's say, the characteristics listed by Hannah Arendt. For example, the objective enemy. You have all the items of a real propaganda. So I think this is exactly one of the problematic issues of this moment, that if you organize it very well with bloggers and different messages for different platforms, and you have a huge network and good money, you can have a propaganda on many themes, on many topics. So yes, thank you. I think if we have a new edition of the book, I think we will add this a chapter about that, because this is one of the things that we didn't take into account. But you are right, and I think this is exactly the point. That is that the mixing up that happened with the new media possibilities, and also you have, of course, the Trump's use of Twitter, for example. What is not propaganda, but isn't that top-down fake news? Sometimes it is. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Giovanni, for your answer, and Francesca for your question. Someone else want to ask something to our guest?
Maria raised the hand. I believe the virtual hand.
Antonella.
Yeah.
Please.
Ciao Antonella.
We cannot hear you. You have to.
We cannot hear. You have to activate the mic.
The bottom on the right.
There is also a bar on the top that pops up. You can write the question in the chat. Or we can guess the question, but and it's probably going into the fake news realm.
Okay, so the question is, in Italy we have a political force, 5-star movement, which has built its political message and its identity on the concept of transparency and truth. Giovanni, is there a gap or a difference between the truth of public speech and the truth of private speech? Does the meaning of truth change? And is there a difference in the epistemological studies?
There are books on this question. Let's say, for the sake of time, let's say that there is a famous author, as you know, which is Richard Rorty, who advocated this difference, saying that there is the liberal ironic guy, he's a hero. He is a person who knows that he has two different vocabularies, one for the private life and another one for the public life, so that we can live together, and at the same time we can still hold our personal interpretation and our personal vocabularies. Is that possible? I mean, this is of course you can advocate something like that, but it is really well, it is a bit schizophrenic from on the one hand, but on the other hand, then it is I fear that it is a very theoretical stand, but it cannot be lived on, because when you have political events, for example, like the Twin Towers attack, is the private or the public vocabulary which has to prevail? And when you have problems like we had right here with the COVID, when you have, for example, the public vocabulary that is so strong that it restricts personal vocabulary, personal freedom, for example, or personal, in the name of a public vocabulary of health or something like that. So that is a very significant moment in which the two vocabularies are contradicting one another, and you cannot say, well, it doesn't matter. Well, so I think this kind of position cannot be held. And epistemologically speaking, I think that the real problem is really epistemological. That is that we have a too narrow concept of truth and too narrow concept of reality. That's why we are always fighting with those terms. Because we mean for reality reference to something existent, which is a narrow version of reality. And we need for truth what we know now, immediately, and a proposition. So the correspondence between a proposition and something existent, or in the currentist version, let's say the agreement between a set of propositions. Those are narrow views of truth. That's why I like more. Let's say I say the pragmatist version, but this is a different version. This is a peculiar version of pragmatism. Let's say that there are many words of reality, and truth would come up in the long run, for example. And so you don't know exactly what it is at this moment, but you know a direction. And I think this is one of our problems. Politically speaking, in Italy, above all, one of the problems, I should write an article about that. One of the problems with the 5 stars, I have friends, of course, in the 5 stars movement. One of the problems is that they started with a very narrow set of propositions, with a strong identity, as you said, and of truths. This is true. And then they had to change it one by one, day by day. And so they are in a deep crisis because, but I think the mistake was at the beginning, because they had a too narrow a view of truth. So this is true. And then they had to change. This is true, that everything that is done by the Democratic Party is wrong. And this is absolutely true. And then, well, maybe not. Maybe we agree. Maybe, and then, okay, anyone who is suspected of corruption is guilty. Then when they started to be in power and therefore to be suspected, to be corrupted, to end up on the newspaper page, they started to say, okay, this is not the way. You cannot say that any suspect is already guilty. But I think, epistemologically speaking, that the set of propositions, which was at the beginning, was narrow, and it was within a narrow conception of truth, a very positivistic one, actually. I don't know, Antonella, if I answered.
Yes, thank you, Giovanni, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, there are other questions or comments? Okay. Well, I just want to, I don't know. Sorry, just the desktop went off. Okay. Well, Maria Antonella was asking about private speech or public speech. And of course, there is a lot of pages dedicated to, we can say, philosophy of language, and all the references to linguistics, and from sociology to performative speech, Austin. And there's also this, you know, when you write the chapter about the critique of the idea of truth, of course, from my point of view, from my education, I was tempted by a constructivist perspective.
Sure.
That I feel it more close to mine. But as you said, quoting Nietzsche, we are that not only the quoting often repeated, there are only interpretations, but also the quote that we cannot be freed from God or other authorities if we are not freed from grammar.
Yeah.
There is a huge languages background into, of course, the concept of truth and reality, and the outcome of this. When you talk about the gains and the losses of constructivism, and you remember that probably the weakening of the concept of truth and its replacement by the idea that everything is an interpretation and perception is everything, we can also say, it becomes paradoxically the best defense of the status quo and the best defense of the authority. And this is, I think, very interesting.
Yes, this is something that that happens, because when you put everything into doubt, you are just the doubt is so general that you are accepting everything. When you say I don't know whether there is reality, perfect. So it's such a general doubt that you avoid any single point of doubt and of discussion. And so it was also from this point of view, I think I think that in the pragmatist tradition, this is not very much Peirce, but it's very much William James, John Dewey, and other people like that. There is the meliorist view of reality. That is, you have to change reality, to try to change reality at least, to do something better. And but better means that you have to act on single topics, on single issues. The idea that reality is wrong, like there is no reality, perfect. And so there is no point in which we have to act or we are called to act. And yes, this is something that it is also, if you want a critique that comes from Wittgenstein when he talks about the idea of the general doubt. The general doubt is like not doubting at all, because it is an empty proposition at the end. And but I can understand that the idea of constructivism is very appealing, and I think it is exactly for the history that we saw before. There is a history of authority as something bad, or as something that has struck us in a bad way, like in the World War was very clear, of course. But you can tell the same about what is happening today. But for example, taking one very updated case, for example, the battle about the fight that there is in the US about the monumental statues. So Columbus statue. Okay, so the usual attitude of Europeans is to defend history. Absolutely. Any history. So in this vision, we had to take also and to save statues of Mussolini or Hitler or Stalin. I'm not sure I want them. And the other and the opposite side, which is let's say the constructivist one in this case, is the idea, okay, let's get them down because everybody needs to, everything goes wrong. I think it would be more viable and even melioristic to fight statue by statue. So we can discuss about all those guys. I think that there are no lay saints, so they are there not because they were good men or good women. They are there because they did something specific. But we can discuss the specificity of that. I don't think that Columbus was there because he was imagining a different world ruled by white people. But we can argue about that, and we can have an argument. And I think this is pretty much the same idea, that So if you doubt everything, or if you destroy everything, or you defend everything, this is to an ideological status. And the idea is, let's face the reality. The reality, of course, of all these human beings has both positive and negative sides, and we have to. And I'm not defending a priori all of them, but I'm not condemning all of them a priori as well. And I think that this is let's say a different view, less in a way less ideological to this kind of debate. And also the constructivist realist debate, or the nominalist realist debate, if you want to put it in the philosophical way I put it before, is not an ideological battle. It is a very specific battle. Then, for example, I'm very convinced about the opportunity of accepting a realist attitude for mathematical reasons, not for religious reasons or for political reasons. There are also different approaches, but I think they, at the end, they intertwine in. And if we help one another not to be too ideological, then I think we are getting closer, at least, to a direction of a better society. Not the best society, but the better.
Well, thank you, Giovanni. I think that our time is over. And Sania, if you want to...
Yes, 1 hour and a half of fake news. Yes, it's too much. Imply. It was quite an effort.
But
no, thank you very much. I enjoyed it a lot, and I'm happy that we've had, even in those terrible circumstances, nice spring and summer. I don't know if Alessandra told you, but we are just doing our best to keep together, to communicate, despite all the obstacles that are in front of us. And I can hardly imagine what will happen in autumn. We are all discussing hybrid modalities of communicating, trying to make a shift. And why am I all saying this? Through your own perspective, through the fact that you came to this point of discussing all this via Charles Peirce, and through, as I understood you well, the idea of grasping the reality as it is, even though we don't know what it is.
Yeah, with openness, let's say.
That's it. Even though we do have those screens all the time, not only the iPad or our computer screens that are just confronting us like under the jar bell with what the natural is. And the thing that is sort of, this is the media perspective, attacking us. This virus thing is not even, it's part of us. And we still have this composition of communicative strategies through a ballistic form of defending, attacking, making, combating, etc., etc. So, but this is something that we have already
Right.
in our bodies. So, tell me about this of having something within through the lenses of pragmaticism or any realist attitude.
Yeah, it is that I think that we are part of we are a part of this developing of reality, and so our interpretations are part of this development. And as we were talking before with Alessandra, we are unavoidably also ideological in our turn, and so we are also. I think we have this kind of development in ourselves, and also, for example, all this debate. I don't think there is a plain realist or a plain constructivist or a plain nominalist, but I think we are. If we are sincere, let's say, we have all attitudes in ourselves, and we can understand them very well. The good thing about philosophical clubs and philosophical communities like this one is that we are helping one another to get into a direction of a better society, certainly, and also a better comprehension of reality, even though, yeah, we don't know it exactly. We don't have the exact definition. We don't have all the propositions, and we know that our propositions are a small part of that reality. So that's why I think also in the COVID era, for example, is very important to have a fair conception of science. All good scientists know that science cannot predict anything, except that in mechanics, well, not even in mechanics, all data are different from one another. So if you are a good scientist, you know that your truth is an approximation, but keep going is already something.
We should keep your last sentence among us, among ourselves, because it's a tricky one, and you know, it's also relates to immunity mechanisms. You know,
Right.
As soon as your immune system develops sort of autoimmune troubles, which is if you are suspicious of your truth or stance, then
Right.
it's a shaking ground. No, thank you very much. It was
Thank
very
you all.
inspiring. It was very inspiring. And next week we are meeting with Bonnie Honig, and Valentina will host our meeting. I wish you all the very best for the end of the week, and see you soon. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.